which in my opinion says so much in 7 words. And you also chair a college development program based out of Kansas City for underrepresented youth. Holy shit, I had to take a breath.
You make me tired just hearing about it. I'm like, oh my gosh.
And the CVS receipts, and I am here for this. Like I feel like you are the person that they like envision when they say like, if Beyonce only has 24 hours in a day, you do too. Like you do a lot with those 24 hours.
I do what I can. I definitely do what I can. Snap takes a lot of those hours, but I do what I can.
That's the 9 to 5 always. So thank you so much for coming to speak with us. Like I mentioned, I've heard you lead a conversation on the topic of AAVE twice and just the impact that we as marketers have on the adoption of what's been coined internet language and the villinization of a lot of its native speakers. So when we are putting together this off the rails content series, to be honest, I've kind of have been volunteering you for this off the rails for like a couple of months now. And it just so happened that it worked out and that you agreed to it, because if you hadn't, I would have looked really bad. So
I'm glad it worked out for sure.
So thank you so much for coming and lending your time to us. So I think before we get started, it is important to level set with the people on this call. So let's just explain to the folks, what the fuck is AAVE? What is that? Why are we here? For those of us who don't know the acronym, what does it mean?
Yeah, of course. So AAVE is short for African American Vernacular English, which is unaffectionately also known as Ebonics or slang or like hood language, all sorts of things that are typically negative connotations of the way that a certain group of people, African Americans, typically tend to speak. It has recently been adopted and co-opted as being internet language, but AAVE actually has a history within linguistics specifically. It is truly its own dialect, a very specific dialect, as is any other dialect within the American language. Even if you stroll back within the history of it, I believe it was in the 1980s, there was an entire controversy over it. And that was when they were calling it Ebonics at that time, where teachers in Oakland, California specifically wanted to basically make very different classes outside of regular English classes for Ebonic speakers, because they felt as if they weren't able to understand and grasp the typical American English as it seemed fit, even though obviously there are different rules and innate tricks to speaking African American vernacular English. It was basically demonized in that way and considered almost to be a learning disability at that point. So we've come far from that, but as I mentioned, this was in the 80s, so we're not that far removed from that connotation. And I also want to mention as well that, again, this was in Oakland. I think that's something that I've realized, being someone that is from the Midwest, living on a coast, that there is a extremely cloudy area about a lot of negative connotations when it comes to Midwest and Southern people, but a lot of the things that we experience when it comes to the demonizing of these regions and of the people of these regions really branches from a lot of these more liberal or progressive parts of the country.
That is a really great point. Thank you for that. And then I think the biggest thing that you kind of touched on it, and is the fact that this started in the 80s, because it feels like a lot of people think that this language began in the TikTok era, that this is all stemming from the globalization of TikTok and really just viral TikTok tweets and trends.
Yeah, and I mean, even that is just from the actual term Ebonics was coined in the 80s, but AAVE has been around since the beginning of time, saying words like, y'all, finna, all those things have been around since the beginning of time, since Black people have been in this country. So I think that we even have to go back even further than that. So that is part of the reason why it is, so interesting to see that it is being co-opted in this way. And I think one of the benefits and one of the issues of technology and of social media is that you do kind of have a door into other cultures. And even though that sounds like it's a positive, oftentimes it's a negative. And it's not that you want to like gatekeep exactly, like what Black culture is and what it stems from. But again, when it comes from that erasure of Black culture, which we have seen in the entire history of this country when it comes to music, when it comes to dance, when it comes to art, photography, science, every field you can imagine. It just is really hurtful. And I think that also when you get into even the societal implications of speaking in a certain way and speaking in AAVE or in Ebonics or quote unquote internet language, it really makes it to where when you are a native speaker of that, it's like people are mocking you almost because they see it as a fun way to talk on TikTok when this is really how people have talked their entire lives. And we have been taught, as people of color that speak this way, don't speak that way. So when you go to jobs, when you go to interviews, put on your code switching voice, put on your quote unquote white voice. So then to see these people with this white voice saying, oh, let's put an ad and let's throw y'all in there to make it relatable. It's like, which one is it? And it's like, at what point does the adoption of AAVE come to the point where it's more than just adopting the language and adopting this and actually accepting and adopting the speakers of it?
That's a great point. And it actually is a really good segue into my next question for you. So when did you realize, or what was your first experience with the normalization of AAVE amongst non-Black communities? Now I have one, and my first experience was when I heard people using the term bae. That's my bae, he's my bae. And I heard an exchange between two girls and they were trying to understand what bae meant. And one girl looked me dead in the face and said, it is an acronym for before anyone else. But in actuality, babe is just babe with a little less enunciation. So to me, the fact that they're creating meanings of AAVE was just mind-boggling. So I'd love to hear about what was your first experience with internet language?
I think to even go before, I won't say my favorite, I won't say it's my first, but definitely my favorite is when people didn't watch like Real Housewives of Atlanta, and when Nene Leakes said woo child and people were saying woo chile because they didn't watch it, they know who Nene Leakes was, and people were definitely saying woo chile instead of woo child, but neither here nor there. I think that it even goes back really even further than that, because I think when I first really noticed it was I am extremely active on Black Twitter. Like I love tweeting. I'm always with like all the hot topics, and like even for years I would notice that the second there will be something that will be trending in Black Twitter is going on BuzzFeed. It's like, oh well, here are the best memes and the best tweets and the best that and the other. And I think that it kind of just put like a door into what not necessarily, it's obviously not the safe space because it's the internet, but a place where we had these conversations that were typically very cultural, very nuanced, and now we have it on like a public display when there's a lot of nuance missing, because obviously we're not the ones writing the stories about what's going on Black Twitter. So I think that was when I really seen when the door was starting to open, before I actually seen it actually adopted in like regular like speech and within like actual content. And I think it even goes even further to before TikTok, even when we look at the early days on like YouTube, and when we look at like the Shane Dawson era and the Perez Hilton era, and like some when they were doing the gossip and trying to use like a black scent to like enunciate and talk a certain way when they're talking about certain topics. So I think it's been very gradual. But I think that when we get into TikTok, as you mentioned, is like such a global platform. It really has it on a different type of scale where you kind of are being inundated with it so quickly that you don't even realize what you're picking up, and you don't even have the opportunity to provide that nuance like you did on even YouTube or on BuzzFeed.
Yeah, and how has seeing this dialect of English, like and very specifically this Black dialect of English as everyday internet language, or the new term Gen Z language, really impacted you and how you move in non-Black spaces?
Yeah, so for me, I mean, as you know, Jay, we've known each other for years. Like I've always talked like this. I have not been an adopter of code switching. After I had graduated college, I tried it. I was like, I don't even know what I'm talking about. Like I was focusing so hard on not trying to sound like myself that I wasn't able to bring my full self to the table. And this is one reason why, like, I know a lot of young people reach out to me to figure out how did they do that? How do I necessarily bring my full self into these spaces that are white spaces without having to, code switch or adopt or assimilate in a certain way. So I think for me, it was definitely a different journey because I started a little bit before now, obviously since I've been in my like professional career. But I would say just overall, I think it is very interesting to watch other Black people try to navigate it, because obviously when you don't set that up as a way that you are coming in, it almost is like you make yourself the joke, or you make yourself like, the token Black girl. And I experienced that myself. One thing that I've experienced being a Black woman in the ad industry is it's always fun. It's fun in the beginning. Somebody, that can talk to you about Twitter jokes and can talk to you about housewives and talk to you about memes. But then when it comes to the actual service and understanding and adoption of issues that are very real, beside, the fun stuff that we talk about, it becomes an issue. And that's when those stereotypes between the language come in, or the professionalism come in, which is obviously, a white superiority construct in itself. But it's always fun in the beginning. And I think even when you look at like a lot of campaigns just with the past few years, and like, even when you look, and I'll just think of Popeyes at just the top of my head. Like when you look at, like Popeyes, y'all good. It's like, oh, this is cute. This is viral. This is this, that, and the other. And it's like, this is an insight that's more than just, somebody saying, oh, this is internet language. This is like a term. This is a phrase. This is deeper than this just being something fun and cute. And again, I can't say y'all good in a business call. I won't win a can award for that. But so it's like there's so many levels to it. So you still do have to find that middle ground when you are talking, in professional spaces, because as much as people want to think that it is being adopted, it's almost like at what cost? Because it does still feel like at this point, it's almost to a point of mockery, to a point where it's like funny, to the point where it's like, oh, this is separate from this group. And to where it's like, again, it's like a joke, and it's not. People have been speaking this way for generations.
Not our blues. They want what's funny, but not they don't want the baggage. And you spoke a little bit about how you no longer code switch in your professional world. But when did it become apparent to you that code switching in and out of AAVE was something that you would have to navigate even before you entered corporate America?
Oh, that's a talk that when you are a Black youth that you get before you even get into the workplace, period. Before you even get into corporate America, when your first job is at McDonald's, when your first job is at Forever 21, no matter where it is one of the many talks, that you have to have as a young Black person in America. For you to be able to be accepted, you have to work twice as hard. You have to, code switch to be able to fit in. You have to do all sorts of things. So I always knew it was something that I would have to adjust and adapt to at a certain extent, at a certain point of my career. And unfortunately, everybody has those conversations from the beginning. And I think that I'm very, very lucky to have a mother that like understands, that I physically I'm unable to to do it. I literally cannot do it. but I know that I have a lot of friends that are, trying to come into finding their own voices and, really being able to bring them their full selves to work, or at least a partial self to work, because I do want to make a note about that, because I have noticed that term thrown around a lot about bringing your full self to work. I think one thing about that as a person of color, period, that even just the fact that you feel like you should have that privilege to be able to be exposed to people's 100% pure self at work is something that needs to be dissected on its own. So when I say as a Black person to bring your full self to work, have whatever you want that person to bring, whatever level you want to bring it at, whatever that comfortability is. So I think, again, they're having troubles navigating that, because they do have parents and grandparents that are like, oh, you have to do this, or, you can't do this and you can't do that. So just trying to juggle, again, that societal and cultural expectation from your families. And especially when you realize that a lot of Black people in corporate America right now are first generation college students, first generation people in corporate, like your parents don't have that similar background. A lot of those nuances go missing. And of course, corporate America now is different from corporate America then that they weren't even in. So there's a lot of conflict, I think, just as far as like adopting that and figuring out where your place is.
And do you think that code switching is an action for the comfort of non-Black people, or is it for you? Do you feel more comfortable when you feel integrated into this space, or is bringing, like you said, whatever full self you want it to be really the best approach?
Oh, I think that code switching is 100% for non-Black people. I don't think that that is something that, like I remember a vivid story when I was at I believe I was at 72 and Sunny at this point, and I like went out with my coworkers one day, and there was like some other people at the bar that I didn't know, but we were just talking. So they had heard me speak even differently from the way I talk at work with the way I was talking to these people at the bar, and they were like, "Oh, why? Like, I've never heard you talk like that before." And I'm like, "Girl, first of all, we at work, and I wouldn't be talking to you like this because, like, we're like, now we're in a bar, but it's like little things like that." So it's like, this is definitely not my comfort, because when the second I get comfortable, that's when you give your full self. And I think, again, it goes even deeper, because when you get into code switching, in the workplace, it definitely, I cannot tell you how many times I have had friends that have had reviews, again, about professionalism and enunciation and about presentation and about all these things, even though they make 125% sense on every call they have. Clients love them. There's always something they can nitpick apart, which is obviously based in like a bias, whether people realize it or not. So it really is like a way to navigate this corporate world, and again, based on more like on reviews and being able to assimilate within a certain type of way in a certain type of environment. But nobody wants to code switch like unprovoked. I promise you. I don't think so.
And you spoke a little bit about this, but how does this normalization really contribute to the erasure of AAVE's native speakers in the workplace, but also even in the ads that we're pushing out of the door?
Oh yeah. And this is a good question, because I can also answer Perry's question with this too. But when it comes to ads, it's like there are so many levels, obviously, as we know, people that are like, ad professionals, so many levels to getting things approved. And unfortunately, when you look at the ad space, there's very few Black faces at the top, very few brown faces at the top. So a lot of times when you have people that are in like, the entry or mid-level positions that, are trying to, speak up and like, hey, this is something that you shouldn't do. This is something that you shouldn't speak to. It's like, it gets overridden. But and a lot of times, it's intentional, and a lot of times it's not, but it often gets lost within the funnel before you get to the top. And then once you realize the value of that voice, all of a sudden that voice is going to be put to use, to all the way to the end in the tunnel, without necessarily feeling the need for that promotion, where you actually end up feeling used. I can mention that there was a client that I work on, and we were doing a campaign. It was supposed to be targeted towards like young Black males in shaving. And when we were talking about it, and so it was like with a Black owned brand, and they wanted to put a language, and it was something about like, I can't even remember, y'all. It was something like about like being like ashy or something like that. And I was like, y'all, like, that's not, even though that's not necessarily AAVE, that's obviously something that's very specific to like, to the Black experience, and to like Black skin. And I was like, there's another way that you can say that. And it was talking about like, having like sunscreen properties to it. So what they meant is like the anti-white chalk look. So it was actually like more of a moisturizer, but they were saying the word ashy. And I'm like, well, y'all can't do that. And so I showed them, obviously like the connotation of like other players that were in the market that were the way they were speaking to it. There was like actually like, truly like Black owned brands that weren't like acquired by like a monolithic company. So, and we were able to like pivot from that and use like, like a anti-white residue or something is what we landed on. But you would be surprised, because there's so much nuance that goes into there. And when you don't have those voices in the room, or when you don't listen to those voices when they are in the room, that's when we get so many of these campaigns that we've seen over the past few years. Yes. That are so tone deaf and so devoid of nuance.
Yes, and I'm going to jump around a little bit, because you segued into a question that I had a little bit later, and it's about how we create space for BIPOC people to really speak out when this appropriation is happening. And this is an anecdote that I think has followed me and my career for a really long time. And I think you know exactly which one I'm talking about, because you were an intern. I was an account coordinator at the time. It was a Data Rich commercial that.
Yes, indeed. I didn't want to bring that up. I literally thought about it, but I wasn't going to bring that up.
I brought it up.
I wasn't going to bring that up, Jay. I promise you I wasn't. I was like, I don't know how murky we are if we going to name drop brands. But yes, I remember that vividly.
That really redefined how I felt in the workplace. And to me, it wasn't just that it had, so for the people who don't know, this is a commercial that was created to promote data rich, but the term data rich has a lot of nuance to it because it wasn't meant to just talk about having unlimited data. And if you don't know what we're talking about, look it up. It had racial undertones. It had the music bed of You Can Have Whatever You Like by T.I., all white family with data rich on the knuckles of their hands. They launched it on Martin Luther King Day. Do you remember this? And then they came in.
I remember it vividly.
They came in that Tuesday and they sat us all down and were telling us about this commercial. And I just remember looking around the room and everyone was so confused.
So confused.
Like as to why it was pulled. And I remember you and I looked at each other and you were like
we weren't in the room when it happened. Like no Hamilton reference, but we were not in the room where it happened. So now here we are, and it's like, and we're sitting here getting, this talking to, and it was so crazy. And it was pulled in like a day. It wasn't like they spent all that money on that commercial, and it was pulled in like a day. It was like instantly pulled. And again, it was like, with us being, so entry level, we didn't get a chance to be into those conversations. Like, y'all, this is not a good idea, but it was absolutely insane. They had the finger tattoos. It was supposed to like obviously be a nod to being hood rich. They was in the car, like throwing up gang signs and glasses. It was outrageous. I vividly recall it. And I talk about it all the time, actually.
I talk about
it. It's crazy.
And what's so interesting to me is that they shared the commercial with everybody after it had launched. And I mean, you and I know that like we were, if not the only two people of color on that entire team, intern and account coordinator. So how do we create spaces where in situations like this, like people feel empowered, specifically people of color feel empowered to speak out when this level of appropriation is happening?
It's so hard because again, it's always going to start at the top. And this is also like, this can lead me into like Chris's question. Like it's always going to start at the top, and that culture, it makes such a huge impact. Like I can say specifically, like since I have been at Snap, and I will, say like, obviously I'm sure last year had, some impact on, that and on like, on the visibility of amplifying Black voices. But I have been extremely vocal about, things that I have felt about some of the campaigns that we wanted to run or things that we wanted to do like internally as an organization. I've been very open about what I see to be recruitment issues. And I do feel as if I have been like heard just across the board, and not in just like her, but like where there are like, even if there's small steps towards that action. But in order to make all of your team feel comfortable and feel welcome, it has to start at the top. And when I say the top, I mean the tip top. And because at the end of the day, when you don't have that visibility into what's going on at the managerial level as a leader of an organization, that's the reason why the retention of Black and brown talent is so low, because you don't feel comfortable to, speak up or speak out. You don't feel comfortable enough to use your voice in something that you know about to prevent something from happening, because you don't feel as if you have that voice while you're in that space. So really finding managers and leadership that truly believes and understands the value of these voices, more so than just being a face on the diversity recruitment docket, is a huge reason why like cultures have to evaluate that stuff from the top up. And I know there's even a meme going around that like obviously it shows like the pyramid of corporate America, and it's like all white men at the top and then all the people of color are like down at the bottom. And when you have all of that stuff piled up on top of each other, it's one reason why the retention is so low. It's one reason why you see more and more like people that of color starting their own businesses and working together to build their own type of agencies that are very specialized and specific, because they know that that voice matters and they don't want to have to wait 6-7 years for it to have to be heard and have to play the game in order for you to get there. So the cultures, it always is going to depend on the leadership and the way that it goes. And even with Spike DDB was obviously a predominantly Black agency, and it also brings in, and I had an amazing time at Spike, and that was definitely not an issue that I had there. But even with it being said, like the other nuances of in corporate, like, age, experience, or like, backgrounds, or who knows who, or whose family is who. It's like, there's so many like areas of nepotism when it comes to being someone in corporate America, and as someone that does not have that background, again, being first generation, or being someone that's like, new to the industry altogether, it will take you a few years to navigate and understand. So really the answer that I would have to like having people feel welcome and wanting them to use their voice is to have that leadership role, and to have actual true diversity towards the top, because that makes a huge difference. I remember when I was at 72, they had this call they were very excited about, so happy about, because they were, I think, like maybe 54% women in leadership. And when I started at 72, I was the New York office specifically. I was the only Black girl that was in the entire office. The company had been in New York for 3 years at that point. I was hired, initially told that I was going to work on Smirnoff. Then when I came in, I found out I was going to end up working on Ciroc. My third day in the office, I was in a tissue session with the client. So basically they were saying they felt that the team wasn't diverse enough to work on Ciroc. So now they had their new diverse hire at this point. So that was what my role was at that company. And but later in my time there was a lady in leadership. And so we had a call, and she routed up all the women in the office. So at this point, it's me and one other Black woman. And she has like, oh, well, do you raise your hand if you feel represented in leadership? And me and the other Black woman didn't raise our hand because we don't. And she tried to argue with us on why we didn't feel seen in leadership. And I said, well, there's no Black people and there's no Black women. I don't see myself in you. Like, so that's what your question was. But they would use, again, that diversity card of it being, oh, we're 50 something percent women, 50 something percent women. But it's like that, but you are not the generic answer for womanhood. Like being a woman is obviously an intersectional thing. There are multiple demographics that come along with that and different experiences that come along with that. So no, I don't feel represented in leadership. So I think, again, having those voices to empower you to want to feel like you can speak and enable you to speak really comes from seeing yourself in those positions. Because if you don't see yourself in those positions and you don't know why, you would think that maybe they did speak out, or maybe, there was an issue, on why somebody didn't get promoted or why they ended up having to leave the company. So those thoughts always go through someone's head at like a lower level.
Oh, absolutely. And then going back a little bit to AAVE, but do you think that there will ever be a world where AAVE is adopted as an English dialect in the workplace, the same way that y'all and fix into and let's make a picture, which are parts of, let me enunciate, white Southern dialect, have been made acceptable in these spaces? Like, will there ever be a place where those things will be as equally accepted as AAV or as Southern English dialect?
I'm conflicted about that, because when we say accepted, I think instead of the word accepted, I want to say not demonized. Because one thing about me is that I do not look for, acceptance from the majority. I don't want to hear them talking like me. I don't want to hear anything like that. Like, that is a language that is very specific to me. Like, and I don't want people to feel comfortable enough so that they can't talk to me like that. Because I have seen that. Like, I say girl, I say boo a lot. I'm like, girl, why are you talking to me like this? When people they get very comfortable. So I don't want it to be that acceptable to where you feel like you can talk to me like that. But I do want it to be at a place where it's not demonized and where it's not penalized for the way that you speak naturally, especially if you are able to perform your job, you're able to perform it well, you're able to do everything you need to do. I don't see why that would be an issue. And I will say that everyone that I know that has ever received marks about presentation or professionalism on the agency side specifically, it has never come from a client. Never. And it's crazy because as we even look at like the ad landscape now, it's so far behind as far as diversity and representation on the client side. And so it's like, no, the client's not saying that. But, this is something that, again, it was within this culture of this industry particularly that is clearly, being like driven home. So I think versus acceptance, just to the point where it is like truly normalized, well, not even normalized, but not penalized and not discriminated against, and does not impact performance or any like of those type of reviews.
And you've touched on this, but I think we're all aware that brands are starting to adopt this vernacular as well. You have your Popeyes and you have your Wendy's. why do they think that that is even acceptable? Like, what makes them feel empowered to use that language?
The answer to that is simple. It's because it's removed from the Black experience. When you are able to put fun titles over it, like, Gen Z or internet language or whatever it is that you want to call it, it's easy to remove it from Blackness. It's easy to erase the Blackness from it. So you don't feel as guilty about it. You don't feel as if, you saying bae or using, who child is tied directly to Blackness. So you don't see an issue with it. You're like, oh, this is TikTok language. This is this is that. And a lot of it, I mean, when we get into, obviously ushering in a younger generation and being that there has been such an overexposure, and such a cross, cultural immersion when it comes to social media, that history is slowly starting to erase itself to where you only see that on a small screen. And so then when you hear it in real life, that's when it becomes a stereotype, or that's when it becomes something that's, negative. It's like, oh, why is she talking like that? But that's really how people actually talk. But when you continuously see people that don't look like that, speaking like that in a way and going viral for it, it seems very normalized as something that is very accepted across the board. And it's simply not. But that's one reason why, again, brands feel very safe doing that. Even when you look at some of the campaigns that win, like win awards for like going viral, and the language they use is never tied directly to it being like, Black language. Never. It's always tied to Gen Z somehow, or tied to a social media platform. But when you erase that from it, it becomes a lot easier for people to digest.
I heard somebody refer to it as digital blackface, which I thought was a really interesting term and connotation. But is there a way for brands or people, or specifically brands, to use this language so that it feels authentic, or should we just all scrap it from any possibility of use?
Well, no, I don't think that it needs to be scrapped, but I think it needs to make sense for the brand. Like even with Popeyes, it can make a little sense for Popeyes. So when you get into IHOP, when you get into Denny's, when you get into Wendy's, when you get into brands just doing it just to do it to have a moment, that's when we get into that, that mockery stage. Do what makes sense. Like I'll say one of my favorite commercials, and it actually doesn't have any speaking in it, but I think when you acknowledge the Black experience and everything that you present, and you want to try to tie it back to language or to moments, it makes a lot more digestible. It makes a lot more sense versus, again, you're at Denny's and you're talking about a grand slam, and then all of a sudden using hashtag Bay. It doesn't make any sense. But like one of my favorite spots, and I think this is a great case study for just like how to really dive in on like the Black experience in a way that is very tasteful, it's an Apple commercial, and it's from years and years and years ago. I want to say it might have been for the iPhone 10. It might even been the 7. I can't even remember. I'll find it, so then like we can send it out if we want to. But it was like to highlight the new camera, and it was for the new iPhone camera, and it was taking place in a barber shop. And so it was a Black barbershop. It had the same aesthetic of what a Black barbershop looks like, which in the community is like a sanctuary for Black men. And it had the same, same type of age demographics, everything. And then at the commercial, a white guy walks in and wants a haircut. So everybody gets kind of like, what is this guy up to? Why is he in this Black barbershop? But so they cut his hair, and then they take a picture on the phone, and they post it outside. So eventually everybody, in the neighborhood is coming to this place to get a haircut. And they have the pictures up from the iPhone all over the windows. And the reason why I like this so much is because, again, when you dive into the actual insight of the Black barbershop, it doesn't mean it's a Black commercial, because it's a diverse commercial. They have people all over of all colors throughout the spot. But it goes to show that, you actually did your research to understand that this is like, a Black cultural phenomenon that you are basing it in, but you can still make it relatable. Because I feel like too often people think that just because it's a Black experience, that means it can't translate into being something that is general market. And that's simply just not true. But there's a way to do it with tact. There's a way to do it with research. And there's a way to do it for, again, something that makes sense for your brand. And I think that a lot of brands, again, do it for a quick, viral moment, instead of doing it for a way that is very representative of the community within itself.
Absolutely. And then I do want to allow time for questions, and I do see one pop up from Chelsea, and she's asking, how do you advise including people of color in discussions without making them feel like the token consideration while also understanding that obviously one voice doesn't represent the majority. So how do we start to include people of color in our agency in a lot of these conversations without making them feel and having them carry the weight of the entire population?
This is a tough one because I feel like a lot of companies are still working to figure this out. Um, and I think, obviously, I can't speak for like, all Black people when it comes to like, how they define their feeling as a token. But I will say, and this is a conversation that I've had at work recently, is that most of the time it has very little to do with people being offended that you're asking, and more so what you're doing with that information. So if you have me in a room to tell you, hey, y'all shouldn't use data rich. I'm like, oh, okay, that was good to hear. We got the Black perspective. We're gonna do it anyway. Then it's like, all right. But so when it comes to where you feel like you were just like at an echoing chamber and people are bringing you in solely for, like just like as a sounding board, whether yes, to meet that quota of having the conversation being made, I think that's when the issue comes along. I will say something else that I think is very important. It's something that Snap had did with me that I'm very grateful for, is that once you have them in that conversation and you do actually, take heed to what they say, keep them involved in the project. So don't make people feel as if like, oh, I gave you, this slang for this ad for you to use appropriately or for this social post. And then all of a sudden, is running and then we're submitted to Ad Age and I'm not mentioned in it at all. So like, just really being able to have that recognition and being able to show that you value that opinion, because especially again, like with most, Black professionals coming in at an entry or mid-level, the recognition is already slim as it is and as it stands. So again, just really able to make it to a point where you elevating that position of you inquiring about like what next, about like any of the cultural nuances that may come in play, but also again, taking them along the journey of that project, of that campaign, not just, like just filling them in, but, having them in the meetings with the board members that they might not normally be in, and knowing what their value is so they can experience that. Because a lot of times you get that and you get drilled over the head for it and you become almost like a, somebody to just give you a Black stamp of approval without being able to see the fruits of your labor and being able to, go through the actual campaign work.
Absolutely.
Something I saw a lot working at 72.
And we got a question, Hillary sent it in my Slack. Do you think it's the job of the agency to educate their clients on the topic of AAVE when these situations come up? And if so, what is the best way to approach that?
I think when it comes to clients, obviously clients are very, very tricky to deal with. And I know for me, but again, I know that I'm coming from a place of a Black person. So I'm a very straight shooter about it. We actually had a campaign that I had to push back a lot on, that was trying to basically like make a lens with like a famous like football player and one of his iconic outfits, which was nothing but gold chains. I'm like, y'all, we can't do this. So, but I'm very a direct shooter when it comes to feedback. But I would say, I think that it's very important to, when you are talking to clients, and this is just a practice I keep across the board, is just stay with the facts, like keep it very factual. I don't think it needs to be as much emotion at play into it, but hey, like, are we sure that we feel that this is the voice that we want to have for this campaign or for this brand? And this is why. These are examples of brands that did it well. These are examples of brands that didn't do it well. Where do we think that we want to fit in as far as that conversation goes? Because I think a lot of times, again, when you see moments like, y'all good with Popeyes or, IHOP and IHOP Bay or whatever it is they're talking about, and you get that engagement, it doesn't also convert to sales. So there's that. But even with that being said, you might get the engagement. So they think that's the way to go with them being so removed from those experiences. So I think that, education goes a long way. I don't think it needs to be as, an actual course on it. But when those conversations come up, to really just have them sit and think, is this our place to speak like this, to talk like this? And are we doing this just so we want to be relevant in the moment, or because we want to be relevant within the community and with this generation across the board?
Absolutely. And this is a question from Perry in the chat, but was there a certain moment or experience that really started to drive your interest in having these conversations around AAVE? I know you spoke about it for Fernando Machado. You spoke about it as well. You had a panel on ad color. So what really drove your interest in bringing this conversation to light?
I think for me, it was really just having these conversations like normally, like, with my peers and with and they just really didn't know. And I was like, this is, they'll like, it would be little things that they would do. Like when they'll hear me talking, they'll accidentally like, respond to me in my type of voice, in my accent. People have been at every single job that I've ever worked at. And I'm like, why are y'all talking to me like this? Like, I can understand you the way you talk, the way you talk. So I think just that coupled in with like, seeing how adopted it is across the board. Like I said, I'm extremely active on Twitter. So when you see like people literally butchering AAV, like what are y'all up to? Like it's like, what are y'all talking about? So I think that it was just like, and then again, people just genuinely not knowing and knowing that. And I actually did like my master's, like my final like master's thesis on this topic. And at this point, it was when it was focused on IHOP was doing all this craziness. But yeah, it was like, it's such a way, it was always a way of life for me, being that this is the way that I speak, but seeing that, as someone that, like I told you, does not code switch, seeing what my friends have been going through issues, professionally, and knowing that, they don't really have the words to communicate what exactly is going on and why they feel this way, and seeing these brands being able to speak this way, but they can't speak like this in an interview. I think that kind of is what propelled me to do that. Just like historically, like I was in debate and forensics all throughout high school. Like I've used my voice for a lot of things and for a long time. And I consider myself kind of like a Publius quietly. So I really wanted to like, be able to bring light to the matter, know that I'm somebody that has, kind of like, found that voice. And, of course, obviously everybody still has growing to do. Everybody still has knowledge to learn, but just making sure that does not get erased, because I see it get erased more and more by the day as the world continues to globalize and as cultural continues to go across borders.
Absolutely. And I want to make sure if anybody else has any questions, now is the time to ask, because I think that might be, oh, there's one. Do you think that clients moving agencies in-house will result in more out of touch messaging from larger companies? I know it's a big trend, especially in the cost cutting era.
That's a really, really, really good question. I work with a lot of clients that have in-house agencies, and I think it's so tough because I noticed that a lot of, and it's actually funny because I know a lot of clients are actually trying to like poach from agencies, because I think this is very, very true to what happened. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, I believe Pepsi was done by their in-house agency, the Kendall Jenner commercial. I'm pretty sure that was done by the in-house agency. But it's really tough because when you get into those type of recruitments, obviously they have people that are already at the company that are, trying to get into those roles and trying to get into that. So when you have, sort of like, this monolithic way of thinking and people that already like, know the brand and are trying to experiment on a different type of role, I think it can get very, very tricky, because the way that people on the creative side look at things versus the way that people on the client side is extremely different, as everybody in the ad industry knows. So I think it honestly depends on the way that they are building up those agencies, those in-house agencies, and again with leadership and with this coming from the top, because it can get very, very tricky if you just end up moving people from like already that are already very close to the accounts and close to the clients, when it comes to like having that diverse representation and that diverse experience overall when it comes to like the way that you research and look up insights for creative.
Yeah, and I think you hit the nail on the head with the lack of diversity amongst the people working on it. I mean, we all have different perspectives because of all the clients we touch and of all of the individual experiences we have with these clients and we bring to the table. And then I think we have time for one last question. Do you think social media platforms are the root of this problem?
That's tough. But I think the issue, and I kind of have alluded to this in all of my, like in some of my answers, but globalization and like, kind of like, knocking down those doors of, visibility on different cultures definitely comes with its pros and its cons. And I think, AAVE in particular, obviously with it, like the erasure from the actual Black connection is part of the reason it's making this a problem. But it's like at the end of the day, it's like it's always a weird place to be in, because like it's like you want people to accept it, you want it to be normalized to an extent, but like at the same time, I don't want you to exploit it. I don't want you to make it, you think this is like, a gimmick or, a mockery or a game. And so I think is very tough, because when you're in an age of social media where things are considered to be trendy and things are considered to be like, quick turn,
Cool.
engagement, cool. And that's all that people care about. You don't really get a chance to educate the way that you want to. I vividly remember on TikTok, it was the kombucha girl.
Yes.
I don't know if y'all know what I'm talking about, but the girl that like made the face with you, I like kombucha, I don't like it. Somebody had said something to her, I guess, in one of her comments on TikTok about her like using a black scent. And she did a whole video about how she didn't know what Aave was, and this was just TikTok language and a bunch of stuff like that. And it just goes to show, when you have these people that have these type of platforms that are, again, using it to erase versus amplify, it makes it extremely difficult, because even when you look at the algorithms that are on social media, the voices that are producing the content that are making the trends, that are trying to spearhead the education, are not the ones that are blowing up. You have the Charlie D'Amelo's and the kombucha girls and whoever else that are having these platforms that are choosing to use it. So it seems like it's more normalized, if that makes sense. So I do think it is part of the problem. And I think a part of it, again, obviously, is the algorithm and the exposure of like what the creators are. Obviously TikTok had that conversation last year when they were exposed for, lowering the importance of from creators that are like, disabled or people of color, and had that whole controversy. So when you look at the actual inherent racism of technology overall, it just kind of just continues to pile up. So I think it is part of the problem, and I don't quite know what the solution is as of yet. But just having that exposure, again, it's a pro and a con. And only things you can ask people with platforms is to use them for the betterment of education when they are using those type of things, and to be susceptible to criticism and learning, especially when you have this younger generation being ushered in.
Absolutely. Jazmin, thank you so much for just lending your time and your insights. All right, now this is your time to really just plug yourself. If people want to find you, talk to you, follow you on Twitter, where do they?
No, you cannot follow me on Twitter. But you can definitely obviously add me on LinkedIn. It's just Jazmin and Burrell on LinkedIn. That'd probably be the best way to reach me. Obviously you can email me at jasmin.burrell at Gmail or Yahoo. I'm always susceptible to having these conversations, to meeting new people, hearing different perspectives, and just sharing some of the resources that I have used for myself to educate myself on this topic. Because this is obviously not information that is just coming from me. It is scholarly articles across the board. Share anything that I have talked about as far as different campaigns that we've worked on, or things like videos that we've mentioned in passing, to even provide even further context. I'm always available for that. And obviously Miss Aubrey's class, my babies, you were always free to reach out to me through Miss Aubrey.
Extra credit, guys.
And for anybody interested in in marketing and advertising. But yeah, LinkedIn and email is definitely the best way. I'm so happy to do this, and so many people have cared to tune in and join. And obviously, Jay, I miss you, so I need to make my Atlanta trip soon.
New York. I missed you last time I was up there.
I know. We went to Applebee's the one time you was here.
On your birthday weekend, Burback Mountain.
Yes.
I missed you, but I will be up there. So we'll connect. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
everyone, for joining our Off the Rails, and be on the lookout for info on the next one.
Thanks so much, everybody. Bye-bye.